Welcome to Appalachian Expose. This is the franchise Shane Douglas, and I'm really excited this morning because we have one of the guys. You know, when I was breaking into the business, of course, Tully Blanchard was one of the Four Horsemen, one of the technicians, and that was the style of wrestling that I really loved and watched. So, first of all, thanks for being here, Tully.
Well, Shane, it's a pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you. Thank you. Because what I appreciate about guys like Tully, first of all, your ring work, the technical side of it. That it seemed to me as an amateur wrestler, as a kid, that to me looked like what wrestling would look like, you know, if it was pro, like if there was a professional level to it. And I was always, well, first of all, with the NWA, we couldn't get in Pittsburgh. In 1976, my dad got cable, and that was the first time I was able to now see the guys that I'm reading about in the magazines. I had been a WWF fan, obviously, and quickly gravitated to the NWA because of guys like you and Flair and Arn and Barry and I mean just so many others, right? To me, you guys were the wrestling company, and WWF by that time was becoming the like sort of entertainment company, and so obviously I gravitated to that. So let's start like way at the beginning. Obviously, I'm familiar with your dad running Southwest Championship Wrestling, right? And was not Amarillo. Where was that based out of?
San Antonio.
San Antonio, that's right. So his dad, of course, Joe Blanchard. Had your dad been a worker before he became a promoter?
Oh, yes.
Okay, because I was unaware of that, but I remember having a lot of talks with your dad. He was very open on giving advice and things. And
my dad was an amateur wrestler.
Is that right?
He was the Big Seven champion in 1950.
Nice. And see, that's the point. Like, all those guys from that time frame, right? And a lot of your generation had extensive amateur backgrounds. And so for young kids like me coming in, you know, if you ever would have been stupid enough to think like to get a little bit salty, you'd have ended up with, you know, some anatomical changes. But you know, honestly, it was so great because Jack Victory and I were talking last night, and I said, I'm so thankful I was 20 when I was 20 and broke in when I broke in. Because I got to come into the dressing rooms with guys like you and all these names that I worked with and learn from. So with your dad, when did he step out of the ring, and what was the precipitous to him starting a promotion?
Back in the early 60s, Dad was part of the office in Indianapolis, which had all the big guns.
Mm-hmm.
Bruiser, Snyder,
And
Sheik.
what promotion was that?
Big Time Wrestling. It was nationwide when there wasn't nationwide.
Right, yeah.
And Jim Barnett was the promoter, and they ran all over. Wilbur Snyder was there.
Wow.
Gene Kaniski was there. The Shires brothers.
Yeah.
Roy and Ray.
Right.
And it's like everybody that became a promoter over the next few years all came out of that territory. Right. And that's when I was 6, 7, first, second, third grade up.
And Dad's taking you to the shows?
During the summer, yeah. And that was that they played softball games against communities and stuff like that.
Sure.
It was really kind of a neat way to do stuff.
Yeah.
And then my dad and Fritz Von Erich went together, and I'm not sure just exactly what, but they ended up with the Dallas territory. And my dad got invited to either buy in or promote in South Texas in San Antonio with the people that were running that town. And so in '64 we moved to Dallas, and then in '65 we moved to San Antonio. And I was 11, and I learned how to sweep buildings and sell peanuts and pass out programs and et cetera, because we had our own building in San Antonio, and then in Corpus we did too. And so Dad realized that promoters made more money than wrestlers.
Yeah, that's right. Now I'm curious at this time, like, so you're like 6 to 11. You're going to watch your dad wrestle, working with your dad. Uh, had your dad ever smartened you up to the business at that point?
Oh no.
So, because these guys were all so protective of it, right?
Oh, I mean, that was not a,
So when you're at these buildings and you're seeing your dad, maybe getting some heat on him, did you get a little bit nervous or?
well, Dad didn't really wrestle that much at that point.
Mhm.
And it was a little bit, I was more concerned selling peanuts
Yeah.
and making my $2.50. But yeah, it was whenever I did go to places that he was wrestling. When I went to Dallas and Fort Worth with him, it was a little angst at times.
The reason I ask is my son Connor, 21 now. When he was 5, we had an Extreme Rising reunion show up in Cleveland, and I was living in Florida. Flew up with my son. We go to the show, and I had gotten color towards the end of the match, not even thinking about my son being in the audience. And my attorney was in the audience with him, watching him. And he came back and he's walking Connor in front of him. He went like, and I looked at Connor and I said, "You okay, bud?" And he just started bawling, right? So Sabu and Jerry Lynn, who I'd worked with, came running over and said, "See, we're friends," and all that. So calm down and told him we lied, said it was red paint. So the next morning we're laying in bed and it's probably 4 or 5 in the morning. I could tell someone's looking at me, so I opened my eyes and my son's face is right here. He goes, "Dad, you still have red paint on your head." And I knew it was very concerning to him. You're not even thinking that way. So, okay, so now your dad has bought into the San Antonio promotion.
And Corpus Christi.
Yeah. And how long did he run there? Because I remember going and working in his places whenever I was a kid.
I was gone to college in 72. No, 72 I graduated from high school. In 76, I was 72, then I went to SMU, then I dropped out of school for a semester, then I went to Cisco Junior College. 76, 77, and 78, I played football at West Texas State.
I came in contact with a few people there.
Yeah, and DiBiase was there when I first went up there, and then he ended up leaving. And he was married and just had a child, needed to go work instead of be on scholarship. And so I ended up playing for 3 years. And then in 77 is when I finished all my class responsibilities at midterm, and I graduated in 77, but I dropped out. I left school at Christmas and went to Florida and started wrestling because I needed to go out and understand the business.
Right. Had you, from a young age, aspired to be a wrestler because of your
No.
dad? Or so I wonder, because like in college, the same. If it was like the same for me, wrestling to me in college was a couple shots a month, make some extra money for when you're in college, you're always broke, and never believing I even was good enough to have a career, but just figured I would dabble in this a little bit, and then when the time comes, go to my field. During your academic time and college years, was that your same thinking? Like, okay, I'm going to do this and then become whatever it was you studied?
Well, I knew that I would be a promoter. I mean, I knew that I would get the business at some point.
Right.
And so I studied radio and television because that was the future of the business.
Sure.
And things like that. But it was, that being in the ring was never a goal, even though I had refereed for years, 3 or 4 years, and that actually probably enhanced my career by, I don't know how much, but
understanding
A
it
lot.
from a different point of view.
Well, back in those days when I was refereeing, you refereed every match.
Yeah, yeah.
You saw what was good, you saw what was bad, you listened to the crowd, you had to be in places that
Sure.
you were correct. I mean, you couldn't just float around and be an idiot out
Right,
there.
right. But I'm also thinking, being that close to it, you could see what the guys were doing.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you saw why guys were on the opener and you saw why guys were in the main event.
Sure, absolutely.
And all of the things, and then you were involved in finishes and everything. And so all that before I started wrestling.
Right. And so what was the point, or what was the precipice to saying, okay, I'm going to go from refereeing and whatever else to actually wrestling?
Well, it was to if you were going to be a promoter and pay guys and hire guys, you needed to know what it was like to be on the road. You needed to know what it was like to work every night, the mindset of it all. And so I set out to learn all that. And when I graduated, I went to Florida and worked for Eddie Graham for 5 months and wrestled 6 nights a week and drove 2,500 miles and got paid $250 and had to learn how to budget that and pay rent and eat and buy gas.
Grow up.
And
Time to grow up. Yeah.
all of that stuff. And then in May, I had, well, actually, I had moved to Florida with now Tito Santana,
Yeah.
because he and I played football together, and Barnett fell in love with him, and
Sure.
so he hired him up in Atlanta, and I stayed in Florida for another couple of months, and then I forget where I ran into Wahoo. He maybe came down and worked or called me on the phone or something, but he said, come up to North Carolina. So I put in my notice for with the Florida group and went and worked for Crockett up in the Carolinas, and their business was off the chart at that time. And my income went from about $250 to $1,000 a week.
Wow.
So
Nice. And what year would this have been?
this would have been the end of '77. Florida and North Carolina.
$1,000 is a lot of money.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Well,
Especially going from 250.
And I mean, we drove, and I mean, I bought my first car, and I had an apartment at the motel, because all you did was come by and wash clothes, and back on the road. If you went to Virginia, you stayed up there, and South Carolina, you came home. And so it was a very good time, and got to meet and wrestle a bunch of guys. And then it was time for them to either start beating me or what. And so I left in December and went back home and brought my knowledge to whatever we could do at Southwest. And it was, we made a few changes, you know, and you can't take the first 3 matches of a house show and draw money.
Right.
And so what we did was, we didn't have a studio, we didn't have another place to do TV, so we basically had a studio. We let the audience in early and did an hour TV show before the matches
Now, was this
in San Antonio.
in San Antonio, but like the old 10th and Tech, were you guys recording at a television studio, or was it?
No, this was right in before the matches came in, and then you had to go have the matches, and then on to Corpus Christi, and so it was certainly not a good way to do it, but it was better than having the first 3 matches.
Right.
And then we went on and bought a building and made it into a TV studio. And so Mondays, when we had our own territory, we did our TV show on Mondays, and then off wrestled the rest of the week. But every Monday was in front of 400 people live. And it was an old grocery store that we made into a studio, and so it was.
I'm curious. At this time, you had mentioned earlier you'd have your match and the rest would drive on to Corpus Christi. Were you involved at this point yet in the office of actually helping run the business?
More so just sitting in and listening.
Yeah. I'm thinking like after the show when the guys were all getting on the road, you still got the receipts and all that. Did you do with any of that?
No, I didn't deal with that kind of stuff. We had people that did that. Actually, Frank Brown and his wife did that, and did it very, very well. And then Dad had people do that later on. So
So now you're in the business. I'm going to jump. Excuse me, it's a frog in my throat. Tell Chris to time cue this at this point. You guys don't want to. So let's go back for just a split second back to Florida, because I never had the luxury or the benefit of ever meeting Eddie Graham, but obviously I've heard his name a gazillion times in a gazillion stories, and my takeaway was always that he was one of the masters as far as the booking and the psychology and the building of the characters. Was that your take on Eddie?
Well, Eddie liked me for whatever reason, and he would come down to the office at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I would meet him, and we would train for 3 hours.
Wow.
3 days a week.
Yeah.
And so to be in the ring and have psychology, this is why you do this, this is why you do this, this is why you do this, this is why you do this. And go through that, ask questions and so on and so forth. Probably didn't ask a lot of questions because most everything was just absorbing.
So you're having a PhD level
course
of wrestling at this
Oh,
point,
absolutely.
by yourself.
Absolutely.
Incredible. So now let's jump back. So I certainly want to get back to the Carolinas. That's a huge part. When you're now down working with your dad, Corpus Christi, San Antonio, and you said you wanted to bring that knowledge that you picked up in the NWA Crockett. Was it the NWA then, the Crockett territory? How much? I'm sure your dad is understanding what you're attempting to do. How receptive were the guys in the dressing rooms? I'm assuming that there were guys that were there that were probably around your age and like had been around while you were there.
I didn't deal with that because I was refereeing at that. I was not refereeing, but I was not part of the territory because I was one of the promoter's kids, and then you got Fritz's kids, and you got this. So I didn't work in Dallas and Fort Worth, and his kids didn't work in San Antonio and Corpus and the Valley, and and then it was when I finally, broke into Houston, and me and Gino were partners, and that was huge for any territory.
Hernandez.
Because Houston was the cornerstone of it, And, you know, if you worked in Houston, everybody got paid well, Bosch paid well.
Sure.
And so when Gino and I teamed up in San Antonio, and then we carried that over to Houston, and that's kind of when we ended up with our own territory. And it was a difficult time. It was always you know, Fritz didn't see eye to eye with my dad, and so they ended up having their breakups.
Right.
So, and a lot of the stuff I still don't know and don't care to know.
Yeah.
It's no big deal to me. The wrestling business is the wrestling business, and I knew how to perform and I knew how to sell tickets.
Yeah. A little important in the business.
Well, to some people.
Yeah, very right. So, how long did you stick with your dad's territory at this point before heading back other territories or promotions?
Well, in 1978, my brother was killed in a car wreck.
I never knew that. From
April 23rd.
what happened?
And he was going to baseball practice and missed a curve. And,
Oh my God, sorry to hear that. It's awful.
and so that really affected the entire family.
Of course. Yeah.
And we and my dad came to know the Lord out of this.
I remember that.
And
About your dad.
I was trying to be a star, and I dealt with it in a different way. And so the business had soared and was starting to crumble. We had actually got on USA Network, and I was the show writer and the everything else.
Jack of all trades.
Yes, and it was huge, but we didn't really know how to make the TV show make money.
Mm.
And for a small organization like we had, it was hard to pay $7,000 a week to be on TV.
I'm curious at this time to let the fans understand how this works. The companies now have some semblance of promotions, have some semblance of the ad time, so they can make their money in the ads. I'm sure for promotion your size at that point, and the paradigm of television at that time, you probably guys got none of that.
Oh, we got none of it. We paid to be on the air.
Yeah.
And it was $7,000 a week.
Wow. And again, this time, that's a lot of my period. But back then it was
it was
boatload more.
I mean, we couldn't. My dad was one of the best payoff guys in the business, and didn't have any money left to pay the guys. So now you don't have the good talent that we had.
Yeah.
So I mean, it just starts crumbling, and as you try to fix it and everything, and so we ended up having a big bill with USA, and Vince came in and paid the bill and got the TV time. And that was when it was on Sunday, and then that changed. But when you lose TV, you don't have anything.
Sure.
And so our business was declining, and I had actually tried to get out of the wrestling business and do something else and make a life. And so the big recession hit right in there, and interest for homes went skyrocketed.
Right.
I think my house was, I think I had a 15% interest or something.
Ooh.
Garbage
My
thing.
Lord. Jesus.
And It was insane. And so I sat down and had a personal time in life. Okay, what can you do to make the most money the fastest?
Mhm.
Sell cars, work, wrestling.
Right.
So I said, okay, if I go someplace and get over and get on main events, that will make the most money the quickest.
Yeah.
So I left San Antonio and went to work in, this is 1983 now. And so I went to work in Kansas City. And if you've never spent Christmas in Kansas City, or not Christmas, but winter and Christmas, it is, you need to put that on your bucket list.
Everybody got experience at least once, right?
And so I went there to work, and I was flying in and staying all week, and then fly back to San Antonio for a day or two, and then.
Were you still single at this time, or?
Yes. And
So that was a little bit more of a plus at that point.
yeah, and so it was a very Kansas City wasn't necessarily probably the greatest choices of territories for my plan, but it all worked out because the once a month St. Louis show, which is big,
Right.
I was there, and
Was that Phil Mushnick at that time?
yes, but Dory Jr. was was the booker for Crockett. They were there, and they had the championship match, and Harley was there and everything, and but I had a match with Buzz Sawyer.
Yeah, Sawyer.
And it was a 20-minute for the Kansas championship or something like that. And it was a very, very good match. A lot of crowd reaction and stuff.
Right.
And so Jimmy had only known me as the little baby face,
Right.
never seen me as a heel, never seen me do what I did that night.
Right.
And so I was pretty bold, and I told Jimmy after the matches up in the hotel, I said, Jimmy, if you hire me, I'll make you a lot of money.
Pretty brash statement. Yeah. It's
You know, and
they call that what, chutzpah?
so anyway, so we talked on the phone on Monday, and they gave me a starting date of February 14th of 1984. And so I gave my notice. I worked, finished my, got beat up in all those towns in front of those giant crowds. And loaded my car up and moved to North Carolina. And it was not the North Carolina that I remembered that I'd left.
What way is different?
Oh, the buildings were empty.
No kidding.
Oh, it was
Wow.
horrifying.
Wow.
Oh my gosh. Oh. And but I got there in February and started, and they gave me the TV title, and Paul Jones was my manager, and so on, and worked some stuff, and did a thing where Wahoo switched heel and was my partner for a little while. And it took from February till I think July, the end of July, and we did a Indian strap match and a bull rope match
I remember reading about this and hearing,
with me and Wahoo against Flair and Mulligan. And it was the first sellout in Greensboro for a while.
yeah.
And
So Crockett's looking at one. He's making me a lot of money.
yes.
Tremendous.
And it solidified my spot, and then Dory was the booker, and then they let him go and hire Dusty, and it was a little bit of a kind of a lull right in there, and Dusty asked me in a private meeting. He said, "You've been a booker. What would you do to get this thing going?" I said, "Well, you put the best against the best,
Simple. Yeah.
and that's your best formula." He said, "Okay, what would you do?" I said, "Well," I said, "I'd put Wahoo against Flair and let them beat the crap out of each other." and then I said, "I'd put me against you because I can make you look great."
Again, Nebraska. That's what made us, right? I mean, that's one of the ingredients.
And I said, he said, "Okay." He said, "Well, Wahoo wanted to work against me." I said, "Okay. I mean, you got to make those decisions."
Right.
And
Curious.
that was it.
With Wahoo, I never had the pleasure of working with him. Certainly knew him and was around him. He seemed like a pretty tough guy. How was it difficult to work with him?
Oh,
Was it
gosh,
stiff? No.
Oh, no.
Because
I
his
mean,
stuff
he was-
really looks stiff.
Oh, he was stiff.
Yeah.
I mean, he chopped the crap out of you. My
Sure.
chest bled for
Six
6 months.
Yeah.
But he was probably the best. Him and Dusty both were bleeding sympathy. How great big guys get sympathy is it's a little bit difficult, but they did, and they could make comebacks.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, you can make money.
Sure.
And they did. And but thankfully for my career, Dusty took my advice and put me against him. And then we, right in there pretty quick, we had the Perfect 10 contest and brought in Baby Doll. And
See, this is the part that fascinates me because we're all familiar with the Crockett promotion, NWA, that was the beast, right? The monster. Say all these companies had that same trajectory, and there's that point in the formative years where one or two wrong decisions and could be out of business. One or two right decisions and boom, this thing takes off.
oh yeah,
Because again, as a kid, long before I thought of getting into the business, the WWF at that point, being in the Northeast, was starting to wane a bit. But me and all my friends, we were talking about the NWA, what we were reading in the magazines and then later seeing. So this is like where this begins, after this dead period, and now we're going to relaunch.
yeah.
How long after that point, and whose idea was the creation of the Four Horsemen?
Oh, there was no creation of the Four Horsemen. It was Flair was was the world champion, and he was Anderson's cousin, Ole and Gene, who were staples in the Carolinas.
Right.
And so they had brought Arn in as a nephew or something.
Yeah.
So you had the Anderson clan, which was Ole and Arn and Flair.
Yeah.
And Dusty had booked an 8-man tag match. And he had him in the 8-man tag match. So since I was working against Dusty, I got put in the 8-man tag match.
Wow, just that, like that, just filled up the spot.
And then we did an interview, and Arn made a reference to the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse.
Sure. Yeah.
Boom,
Done.
and it exploded.
Sure.
I mean, it was not okay, we're gonna call these guys the Four Horsemen.
Right.
That never work.
Right. Right.
I mean, but nobody has ever asked me that.
Is that?
But I mean, Arn and I have had this discussion, but
Sure.
I mean, but it just, the chemistry and stuff was there,
Right.
and then they poured gas on the fire.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So like to a lesser degree, we in ECW, I had grown up watching all these heel stables, Four Horsemen, House of Humperdinck, and the Valiant Brothers, and knew that as heels, every promotion needed a great counterbalance, right? That heel contingency. And so Dean Malenko, Chris Benoit, and I come up with the idea for the triple threat and ran it by them. And we had been close friends at that point. Obviously mimicking what we were watching and seeing. They left very shortly after, and then there were a few like Brian Lee was in there for a second, then disappeared. And then Bam Bam came in. It was me, Chris, and Bam Bam. The same thing. The chemistry between the three of us was like we were three peas in a pod. And so speak to that, like how important for the fans to understand as we're running up and down the roads that you actually enjoy being with the people you're with.
Well, it was a different period because Crockett was running 3 towns a night, 2 towns a night.
At that point.
Yeah. And so, I mean, your main event in one town was me against, and this is before Barry switched and came with us. Me and Dusty, then Flair was the world champion and he was still traveling.
Sure.
But as Crockett and the expansion of TBS show went bigger, all the other territories all of a sudden got
Swallowed up, yeah.
yes.
Just a quick little footnote for your fans to understand. When he said that Rick, the champion, was traveling, the NWA had St. Louis, Dallas.
Had all the territories.
Yeah, and so the NWA champion had to
go.
flow through all of those.
Yes. And so, you know, you didn't have Flair, even though he was a part of it,
Mm-hmm.
because as it first started, you know, I mean, it was the unique thing was that we were all, Flair was the world champion, I was the TV champion,
Sure.
Arn and Ole were the tag team champions.
Yeah.
And then when as the company got, and I don't know all the dynamics, but when we got the rights to the Superstation from I'm not sure how they did that. I think they bought it.
Yeah, didn't Vince have it before it was not doing well, and then right?
Well, Vince had taken over Georgia Championship Wrestling, which had the TV,
Right.
had
Okay.
TBS,
I never knew that. Interesting. Yeah.
and that's why there was so much friction because Ole owned part of Georgia Championship Wrestling, but he got swallowed,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it was a time that the TV, as that TV started expanding, we became the national TV show, and then all the other companies, all the other territories became the smaller territories.
Yeah.
And when I was doing Southwest and we started a kind of a relationship with Ole, I brought in Baron von Raschke one time, and I brought in Tommy Rich and that. But Wahoo was our booker at the time, and I said, Wahoo, I said, you can't put them against each other. I said, they need to come in and wrestle you and me. They need to elevate you and me,
Right.
and whatever. I said, if you bring them in and just put them on, then we're the Mickey Mouse,
Right.
and they're the main event.
Sure, yeah.
And he agreed, so we did that. He wrestled Rashke and I wrestled Tommy Rich. You know, I got beat, but I mean,
Yeah,
big deal. I mean, the match was there,
yeah.
so now it's elevated. And when we started on TBS, that was the mistake that most of the promoters did, because they'd bring me and Dusty in, and they'd put me and Dusty against each other.
Yeah.
Well, now you've got the major leagues
Yes.
and the minor leagues,
Right.
and it shouldn't have been. It didn't have to be like that.
Right. Right.
But in the people's minds, that's how it was. And so we began to, I don't know if Crockett bought territories, or I think he bought some and just overtook others.
Sure.
Because they did.
Yeah.
And the whole country became the territory except the Northeast.
Yeah.
And then we started at the Northeast.
Right. And again, just for texture for the fans out there, and in this time frame, when you guys get the Superstation slot, cable was just beginning to really make that nationwide push. Mostly television was syndicated local. Suddenly you're able to turn on it and see something from North Carolina or wherever. And
Right.
so it coincided at the exact, right place, right time when the business starts making this jump. At the same time, the television industry is making this jump into cable.
Yes, and it was a phenomenal time to be in the business.
Yeah.
We're all very fortunate that
Right.
we're there. So
I remember coming into NWA the first time and doing the television at 10th and Techwood. And, as a kid coming into the business, you're thinking, like, this could be like a nice big television studio and all that kind of stuff. And they come in, and I was shocked at how small it was. But
same 14 people.
yeah. I was always the guy that, I would sit in the dressing room, like Dominic taught me, keep my mouth shut. And I would watch, and I literally would watch, how does Tully take his boots out of his bag? What's he put away first? What's he put on first? I was like literally, just picking this all up. And that was the first time I remember at 10th and Techwood, seeing that there was an actual process here. It wasn't just two guys going to the ring and doing whatever. That these were guys, these pros that were systematically creating something. And not that I understood it, but I saw it, and at least I had the bulk of it in my head from seeing that. Talk about those shows, 10th and Techwood, because again, for the fans, a lot of fans remember them, obviously, the 605 Saturday and Sunday shows. But first of all, like the dressing area, I remember we had that corner where we about 25 or 30 of us in there trying to dress. And then what was the hot dog place? They'd always bring.
Oh, I forget.
Not Sonic. The Varsity.
Yeah.
Yes, it was like right across the highway. But for you at this point, as you're now fulfilling your promise to the Crockett's, the industry is exploding. Your promotion is exploding. For somebody that had been around the business as long as you've been around it and seen worn all the different hats that you'd worn, did you recognize immediately that like this is something different, or did it take time to catch up to you?
Well, it was something different, but yet it wasn't.
Yeah.
Because we were still doing the same stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We were producing good television. We were producing TV that got people into the seats.
Right.
And the TV show was your infomercial in those days.
Right.
Today, the TV show is the product.
Right.
And that is a bit of a shift for me.
Yeah.
Or would be a shift for me if I was doing it.
Right.
But it was a time where we had the syndicated show that we were sending. I think we were in like 250, give or take, markets.
Yeah, boatload.
And then you had 605 on Saturday nights and 605 on Sunday nights. Over top of that.
How problematic was that? I'm sure. How big was the crew at this point? 30, 40, 50 people?
Maybe not quite that big. I mean, we used to have 2 planes. We had 10 on one plane and 20 on the other plane.
Yeah.
So
What I'm getting at is with these 250 markets, nationwide television, and obviously a boatload of wrestling fans becoming marks for the NWA, that would then necessitate we need to get Tully Blanchard and the Four Horsemen to Timbuktu and Alamazambu, whatever the cities. You had to, with few people now having to try to cover all that. At that point, did that become a logistical problem for the company at that point to actually keep maintaining this?
I wasn't involved in all those
Mhm.
deals. We'd walk in and they'd hand you a bunch of airplane tickets.
Yes, I remember.
And
You better not lose them.
better not lose them. And then they bought airplanes, which certainly made everybody's life easier. I'm sure the expense was off the chart, and probably hurt at some point.
Right.
If business would have ever went down. But I can't, you have business decisions to make, and Crockett made business decisions, and and some of them affected me and some of them didn't, and you just went and did your job. But they made some calculated mistakes, tactical mistakes, that ended up costing them most of their company, I think.
Yeah. How long was the good run at that point? Was it a 5-year?
Well, I got there in '84 and left in '88.
So a good 4 years, but they were, even after you left, they were still chugging along pretty well.
Yeah, but their business really took a chunk when Arn and I left,
Right.
and went to the WWE.
So let's get to that. What was it like the Four Horsemen? You and Arn becoming joined at the hip. Was that something somebody thought up, or did it just sort of happen again?
No, I mean, Arn and I were just a good tag team. I mean, we were a good tag team for the Horsemen.
Right.
When Barry became part of the Horsemen, I quit being the other single. Barry became the other single, and I took Ole's place with Arn, and we just, did it.
Yeah. I've got to ask. I know we're getting a little short on time. I've got to ask, because I remember as a kid watching it when the Four Horsemen run Dusty off the road and slam his arm in the door. I watched that over and over because I would record stuff, right? And I'm thinking, how the hell are they doing this, right? I've heard different versions of the story. How did you guys do that? Because you're not in a studio where everything's under control or whatever. You're on the side of the road somewhere, right? Where was that filmed?
I thought we followed him
to
the office.
Oh, was it at the office?
And then we tied him up to the truck, and then hit him with a baseball bat and broke his arm.
Yeah.
It was what I remember.
Yeah. Well, the one I'm thinking of, he was getting out of the car, and you guys had his arm in the door. It was a convertible, I believe, and slammed the door on his arm. And Arn, I think, had told me that there was a 2x4 that would fall into place when you guys did that. But even that, you're thinking, okay, what if the 2x4 for whatever reason doesn't fall in place, right? Because it was so impactful looking.
I don't remember that one. I should remember it though. We did a lot of neat stuff, but I mean, we just did it on the side of the road.
Right. No big special effects company
No, not lights, camera, action.
Yeah.
I mean, just took a TV camera and
Yeah.
I mean, the time when we had the camera guy in the back of my car or one of our cars, and we were following Dusty and just shooting it like that. It was good stuff.
Yeah. And you said earlier about Dusty, the bigger guy that he was and everything, was able to sell so well to get that sympathy. In my head, the Four Horsemen were made even bigger, right? This amazing group of wrestlers made even bigger because you had the Ricky Mortons and the Dusty Rhodeses that could sell their butts off to get that stuff over. I mean, it made you guys seem like this tank rolling through the promotion.
Yeah, but it is all of our philosophies were you only get enough heat to give comebacks because people don't scream if there's no comebacks.
True, yeah.
And
You hear that out there, young wrestlers today?
if you and it was not a thing where you had to go get 10 minutes of heat.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was in that 10 minutes of heat with most of those guys, there were 15 comebacks that you start and then cut them off.
Sure.
And
each one of those, the fans are getting a little bit antsier to the edge of their seat, right? Because they know what's coming, they think. But it's, again, how Masters did it, right? Just laid this process out.
Yeah. And so it was, it's all good stuff. And it is probably a lost art.
Yeah. Feels like it, doesn't it?
It is because you don't have anybody going out learning it from what I've viewed.
Same here, yeah.
And I haven't tried to view it intensely.
Right.
But it is when you sit in the dressing room and try to calculate how an audience is going to react, and if your stuff isn't good, they're not going to react the way you think they are.
Sure.
So then you're going to just continue and do your crap.
Yeah. There's a paradigm that I always talk about that to this day befuddles me. Say me and Taz could go out here in Winston-Salem and have a match that blows the lid off the place. Do that same match tomorrow in Roanoke or up the road, and for whatever reason it doesn't get that reaction. Have you ever thought about that? Like why one town it works and it doesn't in another?
Well,
and had you experienced that?
Well, you experience it to a degree. I have, but I never went to the ring trying to have the same match.
Right.
But
I mean the same because
no, I understand. But it is if you're going out there and allowing the audience to, what are they reacting to? You don't fall into that thing. The thing that is mind-boggling to a degree is in Baltimore you're hated, and in Philadelphia they friggin' love you.
Yeah.
And that's 100 miles apart.
Yeah.
How in the friggin' world does that happen?
Yeah.
They're both watching the same TV show.
Right. True. Yes. When Johnny Ace and I were together, I used to get ulcers flying like to Philadelphia or wherever, like, because it didn't matter what you did, they were just going to chew you up, right? It was.
And they loved the Horsemen in Philadelphia, and you couldn't get in the building in Baltimore.
Yeah.
And just amazing. But anyway.
Yeah. So you hit on a point there a while ago about talking about how they're not getting these experiences like you and I learned the industry. If Mick Foley and I went on, Don trained both of us. I was 6-8 months ahead of him. And we used to have good matches for a curtain jerk, right? Dominic would always put us on first. And I always tell kids when I'm doing seminars, if Mick and I had gone on the road then and only ever wrestled each other, what could he have possibly taught me or me him? We were at the same level, right? It was me being put in the ring with guys like you, Pez Wiley, Black, all these guys that were taking me by the nose and teaching this snot-nosed kid the industry. Today, I see very few real veterans that are in the ring with these kids to keep them reined in, let them go when they should hit their spots, to keep the tempo and the pace and the psychology on track. Do you see the same thing?
I don't watch.
I watch clips because of the podcast, and it's not because I don't want to watch. Time is the issue.
Yeah, but I never watched.
Yeah, I remember you saying that back in the day.
I didn't watch her show.
Right.
I didn't watch me.
Right. Was there a reason?
Yeah, because if the audience bought it, they bought it.
Yeah.
I didn't.
Second
I
guess.
was way too critical. I mean, I can sit here and watch. I watched the I Quit match 6 months ago with some people.
Great match.
I think my children were there because they'd never really seen me. They weren't alive when I wrestled. Yeah, God, there were about 5 spots that just sucked, and I should have done this different, and this different, and this different,
Sure, yeah.
and this different, and this different.
Right.
And
But don't you think
so
that's...
but I don't want to go through that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I get it. Because I think any of the guys that are really professional and wanting to aspire to climb the ladder, I think, like I always tell kids in my seminars, you have to be your own worst critic. Like if you're looking at something that looks bad to you, it's probably looking bad to the fans.
It looks bad to everybody.
Right. So tweak it, fix it. This whole time period we're talking about with the NWA at this point, Crockett Promotions, this massive explosion across the country. At the same time, there's this other beast up north that's also on steroids, right? Literally and figuratively, but becoming a very potent promotion. Was there ever a time prior to like when you guys were really going head to head? Was Jim Crockett, Dave Crockett, the boys, Dusty, were they aware that this behemoth was burgeoning up there? And was there a lot of concern to it? What was the mindset of, okay, sooner or later this is going to happen, right?
Well, very seldom, because their cable television, they had the same, their cable television was the USA Network.
Yeah.
And since everybody knows where they got that now.
Right.
But it was a thing that you either I think Vince was probably more aggressive in that because he would sit and look and say, okay, and then he hired Piper from Crockett.
Right.
Then he hired Valentine from Crockett. And
Logan from AWA.
yeah, so I mean, he was picking his opponents and making deals that which he never made a big deal for us. I mean, we just went there.
Yeah.
But it was to replace Arn and I and still call people the Four Horsemen was very, very difficult.
Sure.
Because you couldn't, now you're trying to jam something into this iconic, yes, but it was the chemistry flowed, like I told you already. And so now you're going to just pick guys and stick them in this thing,
right? Yeah.
You know,
prefabbed,
and it didn't work, and for them, and Arn and I went to work for Vince and thought that we were going to get the big push, And even though we became the world champions, we became the C team main event, which was great for them because their C went from drawing no money to big houses.
Yeah.
But our pay didn't go up any. We just made a lateral move.
Yeah.
And that wasn't a good move for us.
In hindsight, because I've gone through this in my head 10 million times. In hindsight, having gone up there, again, you guys were an integral and critical part of the Crockett promotion, right, with the Four Horsemen. Take you guys out. That pretty much, what's the word I'm looking for, hobbles the promotion, the Four Horsemen, etc. I've never gotten to know Vince well. Do you believe that that was something that Vince did strategically? Like, let's take these guys out of here and then we'll shove them over here. Because I remember when you guys went up there, obviously a huge fan of you guys. And couldn't imagine, even though you guys, like you said, had the belt and stuff, but it wasn't like they were, like Steve Austin say, strapping the rocket to your ass, right?
Yeah.
And do you think that was a strategic move by Vince, or do you think it was once you guys got there, Vince thought, I could use these guys over here to fill these buildings up?
I think that was partial it. I think it was, I don't know all the political stuff that went on.
Sure.
Just looking at what the evidence, what I could see the evidence as.
Right.
And it all makes a good story, but
Yeah. The pieces will never be known.
it's hard to, because there's dynamics that happened in a bunch of our lives that they end up, all of them end up lying to you and
Yeah.
not paying you what they say they're going to pay you.
Really, I've never experienced that. So
and you can't harbor that all the time, or you end up being a miserable
true
person.
Yes.
And you've got to be able to go on and live life. And through all of this stuff, I came to know the Lord, so that was nothing better for me.
Sure.
And I've lived a great life for the last 30 years, only going to autograph shows.
Yeah. and here, like the old saying, the old adage goes, the proof is in the pudding, right? So even though you guys left WWE, even though you didn't get this monster push in WWE, you're still internationally known as Horseman, as Tully and Arn. And to me, there's some power to that, right? And that stems off of the work that you guys put in up and down the road, sick, away from your family, all these things, right? That, okay, I can take them, I can do this a little bit to them, right? But they're still going to be thought of as here.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
what transcends.
I mean, our thing is already taken care of. I mean,
right.
I can't, there's nothing I could do other than pass away, and I'm still not going to change what my spot in this business is.
Yeah. Let's finish up with that, so because I know you're on time constraint here. So, having found the Lord and taking this, because out of the business, we see a lot of debauchery on the inside of the business. They're ultimately, to me, like I can hear my dad in my head, always strive to be better. All these little witticisms that he would throw at you. Ultimately, at least in my brain, we get up every morning, we got to stare that guy in the mirror.
Yeah.
And we either have a clear conscience or we don't. Speak to how you're coming to find Christ. Made it a lot easier to see that guy in the mirror.
Well, it was a different image of the guy in the mirror.
Yeah.
I had different values and different things, and then the stuff that I've done in the last 32 years has opened many, many other doors to do a bunch of other stuff.
Right.
I used to know the country by arenas. Now I know them by the prison system.
Yes, yeah. And speaking of that, fans, what you are doing right now, this is really fascinating.
I've been involved in jail and prison ministry since 1994. So that just, what is that? 94, 04, 14.
Coming up on 20.
Coming up on 30 years.
Yeah.
And I'm now the jail and prison ministry director at Cornerstone Church in San Antonio. And gone from a national perspective to a what can we do to affect the families in San Antonio.
All right.
And help guys get out, help women get out, get their lives back together, get
Sure.
their families back together. And so it has been a roller coaster ride.
I bet.
And you know, it's been good things, bad things, but I've got 4 great children, and they are remarkable human beings. And it is, I've got 2 granddaughters that live in Charlotte, and my son just.
And Grandpa doesn't fawn over them at all, does he?
No, I don't get to see them too much, but it would be nice to be able to see them more. But you work, and you don't have time to just dawdle and
Sure.
go do stuff. And my son is in the Army, and he just got promoted 2 days ago to a first lieutenant.
Nice.
And
So you make a career of it?
do not know that.
Yeah.
He certainly could.
Mm-hmm.
And I have, and Tessa has certainly there's few that have equal to talent in the ring that she has.
Yeah. She's very good.
And
she's a sweetheart too. Like very professional, easy to
Oh,
work with.
yeah.
Great personality.
yeah, and it is, and she's gonna branch out and do some other stuff, and going back to school a little bit, and which is I'm proud of her for doing that, and it is. Life's good.
The exact line I was thinking. Life's good, right? It's having children. Well, Tully, I so appreciate you being here with Appalachian Expose and our fans here. I don't want to sound like fawning on you. I always respected and appreciated the guys that could go in the ring and do the wrestling. And I don't think I've ever said it to you, but after all these years of knowing you, working with you, learning from you, and so many other guys in your generation, I want to say thank you. Because I sit here today, built on all that you guys gave me. So I really appreciate you, Tully.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
It's good seeing you.
And you still should have been the biggest baby face in the business.
Ladies and gentlemen, Tully Blanchard. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you here next time on Appalachian Expose.